I rise today to talk about the nomination of Merrick Garland to the United States Supreme Court and to urge my colleagues to grant timely consideration to the President's nominee. I recently had the pleasure of meeting Chief Judge Garland, as many of my colleagues have on both sides of the aisle. I encourage all senators to meet the nominee because I suspect that you will find, as I did, that the rumors are true. He is an exceptionally qualified nominee. Since joining the D.C. Circuit, Chief Judge Garland has been recognized as one of the best appellate judges in the nation. His reputation for working with colleagues to identify areas of agreement and to craft strong consensus decisions is well earned. After meeting Judge Garland and discussing the way that he approaches his role as a judge and as a chief judge, I am pleased to agree with my colleague, Senator Hatch, and my friend, Senator Hatch, who described Judge Garland in 1997 in this way, and I quote, "I believe Mr. Garland is a fine nominee. I know of his integrity. I know of his legal ability. I know of his honesty. I know of his acumen, and he belongs on the court." And Senator Hatch was right. He was talking about, of course, the D.C. Circuit, the second court in the nation, really. Before Judge Garland was nominated, the White House reached out to me, and as I know, to many of my colleagues, especially those on the Judiciary Committee, to ask the type of nominee that I hope that President Obama would put forward, or whether I had any particular names in mind. I didn't. My only recommendation was that the President nominate someone whose intellect and experience and demeanor would be apparent during a hearing, and that Americans who watched the confirmation hearings would come away with, this is what I told the White House, I want Americans who watch these confirmation hearings, I want a nominee who people would come away going like, I'd like 9 of those. I'd feel really good with 9 of those. And now that I've met Judge Garland, I will set about the task of reviewing Judge Garland's full record and all of his opinions. I'll set that aside, but the American people deserve to meet him and decide for themselves whether he is qualified to sit on the highest court in the land. The American people deserve a hearing. But, Mr. President, in my view, confirmation hearings also serve a broader purpose. Hearings aren't just an opportunity for the public to get to know the nominee and discover how he views or she views important issues. Open public hearings provide an opportunity for the American people to learn about the Supreme Court's jurisprudence and to demystify the court's role in our democracy. Hearings also allow our constituents to see and judge for themselves how and whether the government is working, whether we are doing our jobs. But before any of us knew who the president would nominate, Senate Republicans wasted no time in refusing to fill the vacancy until after the election. The majority leader said, and I quote, "This vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president." Republican members of the judiciary gathered by themselves and vowed to deny the eventual nominee a hearing. Many Republicans refused even to meet with the nominee. They said it didn't matter who the president nominated, this was about principle. Mr. President, this type of obstruction marks an historic dereliction of the Senate's constitutional duty. Since 1916, for the past 100 years, the Senate Judiciary Committee has fulfilled that duty by holding hearings. Nonetheless, Senate Republicans have stood firm in their opposition. But within a day of Judge Garland's nomination being announced, some Republicans began to change their tune once they discovered that the president had nominated a consensus candidate, a judge who had earned the praise of so many Republican senators during the course of his career that their calculus began to change. Now, my Republican friends are tying themselves in knots, trying to explain to the American people how they plan to move forward. Quite a few Republican senators broke ranks and agreed to meet Judge Garland privately, while nonetheless maintaining that the Senate should not grant the nominee an open public hearing. Some of my colleagues believe it would seem that they, not the public, not their constituents, deserve the opportunity to meet and to question the nominee. A few Republicans said that they would consider Judge Garland and even vote to confirm him in the lame duck session, but only if the Democrats win the White House. Very odd sense of what the principle here is. I guess the thinking behind that is the Republicans are afraid that should the election not go in the direction they prefer, that then the people shouldn't decide. They should decide unless they decide the wrong thing. That's the odd principle that I've heard in the Judiciary Committee when we've had business meetings there where members come in and make a statement and then leave, and I hear a lot of contradictory stuff. So I guess obviously the fear is that should a Democrat be elected to the White House, that they might eventually face a nominee that hasn't earned quite as much bipartisan praise. So then we'll do Garland. That's absurd. That has nothing to do with principle. This has nothing to do with principle. And it never did. This is about politics. Mr. President, the Supreme Court is too important. It's too central to our system of democracy to let fall victim to partisan politics. It has been just over 1 month since President Obama nominated Judge Garland to fill the vacancy in the Supreme Court, a vacancy caused by the death of a justice. And during that month, the effect of allowing a vacancy to persist has been made clear. The 8-member court has deadlocked twice now handing down 2 4-4 decisions, permitting a seat on the Supreme Court bench to remain vacant means that in some cases the court is not able to fulfill its core mission, its core function of resolving the splits among the courts of appeals and serving as the final arbiter of our laws. The court isn't able to do its job. I think we have to go through our history. Look at when Justice Marshall was appointed in the last weeks, I believe, of Adams' administration. I hope that my Republican colleagues are finally coming to the understanding that they have an obligation here to replace this vacancy. Members of the Senate and of the Judiciary Committee in particular have an obligation to do our jobs, to get to work. Thank you, Mr. President.